Welcome back. Welcome back to Living in Mexico. I'm Ana Maria Salazar. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. You can follow us on Twitter at Mexico Daily. We've kind of upgraded that Twitter account. We're providing more information in English, and we're definitely going to be linking some of the shows to that Twitter account. But also you can follow me in Spanish at AM Salazar. And there I provide a lot of information about my TV shows in Spanish. I have a show on security. It's called Gabinete de Seguridad, a show on international news. It's called Aldea Global. That's at El Financiero Bloomberg. So between these two accounts, you can basically follow some of the content that we're producing regarding what's happening in Mexico and around the world. So my personal account is at AM Salazar and at Mexico Daily. That's where we provide a lot of information about Mexico in English. So it's summertime. Well, I guess it's not formally summertime, but it sure feels like summertime in Mexico. And boy, baby, it is hot out there. There's been reports and warnings in different parts of the country regarding very high temperatures. For those of us who live in Mexico City, the fact that it's reaching 35 degrees centigrade is kind of like a shock. I'm from the northern part of the country, so I'm kind of more patient and understand what hot weather means. But for me at least, now that I've been in Mexico for the last 20 years, in Mexico City is quite surprising, and people are feeling it, and it is affecting people's activities, and boy, it's affecting people's moods. Today's guest is going to just kind of walk us through what this heat wave means and what it could potentially mean for the summer. And we're also going to talk about do we have any sense what the next hurricane season is going to look like? Today's guest is Michel Rosengauss. You know him well. Those of us who've been following the show know him for quite a long time. I think, Michael, you've been on the show for more than 10 years when you were head of the Meteorological Center here in Mexico. Now you're a meteorological consultant. I hope I'm saying that correctly. Welcome to the show. Just walk us through. They're talking about a third heat wave. I'm a little confused as to what this means. Just put into context what we're living through here in Mexico. Welcome to the show.
Hi, how are you? Yes, usually the Met Service in Mexico did not number the heat waves, let's say not as the frontal systems or the hurricanes, etc., etc. But it seems that this year they have started to do that. So more or less, it's about the third heat wave. It depends on what you call a heat wave, in the sense that there is no universal definition of what a heat wave is. Usually, it's a long time, let's say more than 3 days of heat, which is much hotter than normal for that time of year. And it also has to have some let's say, geographical extension. But I don't like the idea of numbering them, in the sense that different parts of Mexico can have different numbers, in the sense that there may be the fifth heat wave in Yucatan, maybe the third heat wave in Baja California. So it's not necessarily the best way to identify the heat waves. But let's agree that they are calling it the third heat wave.
Well, it's interesting because I think part of the reason of calling it a heat wave, the way they're numbering it, is because the impact on Mexico City. And, in Mexico, it seems that the news and politics just revolve on the belly button of Mexico City, and they make decisions and announcement that way. But let me ask you this, in terms of numbers, in terms of, kind of looking back historically, is it much hotter? Are we breaking records? Is something different going on than in prior years?
Well, first of all, the, let's say, meteorological phenomena which is producing this heat wave, which is a high pressure traveling from the west of Mexico towards the east of Mexico, is something that happens many times during the year, in every year, and not only in this season, but in every season. The problem here is that we have one of these high pressure systems traveling and it is very close to the longest day of the year. The longest sun hours in the year is the 21st of June, which we are 5 days away of that. So if we had at this moment in time, we had the regular number or the regular coverage of nubosity, we would be in the normal condition. The problem is that we don't have that cloud cover, and at this point in time, this produces a very high temperatures. I'm not sure we are in a record, but we are close to that record. They were saying that yesterday we had 33.3 degrees in Mexico City, and that was probably the hottest measurement in June that we have. So that could be, if not a record, it is very close to the record. And more important than that, it seems that we are about 8 Celsius degrees above the normal temperature of Mexico City for this time of the year. So for this time of the year, we are in an extreme case. Now, why do we have an extreme case? Well, there are 4 components to this thing. First of all, there is climate change. We know that the temperatures are usually about 1 degree above what we should have, let's say, without greenhouse gases, and that's the first thing that applies. The second, we are beginning let's say a phase of El Niño, which also produces high temperatures in low high temperatures and low rainfall in the summer in the southern part of Mexico. That's the second contributing factor. There's also, the El Niño is not the only oscillation that we have in the earth. There is one called the Madden-Julian oscillation, which takes about 60 days or so to turn around all the Earth globe. And at this point in time, it is in a condition where it doesn't help storms. It doesn't help to have a cloud cover. So that also happens. And the fourth one is the one I already mentioned, which is this dome of high pressure, which is traveling from west to east of Mexico. It so happens that in this particular case, the rest of the conditions of meteorology in the atmosphere in the world makes this traveling of this high dome or high pressure dome very slow. So it has taken a long time, and it will take a few more days to actually exit the continental part of Mexico. So adding all of these things, we have a temperature which is really high, much higher than normal, but if not a record, we are close to the record in Mexico City. But the problem is not Mexico City only. You know that Mexico City is relatively high in the mountains, so it has relatively fresh temperatures. But there are other parts of Mexico, a very large part of Mexico is getting to temperatures of high temperatures in the day, which are above 40 degrees Celsius.
Well, I grew up in Hermosillo. You know that we've spoken about this throughout the years, and people, throughout the decades, people get accustomed to living in the desert and adapt their lifestyles and the way they dress, to make sure they have air conditioning, fans, and the population adapts to that reality. I guess the question is, for the rest of the country, do you sense, based on the information that you follow, that you've been historical numbers regarding heat waves and the climate in Mexico, can we now say that we have there's a quantitative change in terms of the heat that now the Mexican population is going to face, and the way this could potentially affect crops, people's health, the way they electricity use? Do you know what I mean? Is this it? Do we now have to start planning for hotter summers in Mexico, hotter and very, in some parts of the country, very humid, which makes it even more dangerous.
Yes, well, definitely we will have this summer is going to be a hot summer in the sense that we have El Nino starting, but getting to the maximum point probably in December or January. But adding, let's say, the climate change, the increase of temperature in the whole globe, plus the other things, we will have a relatively hot condition. Humid, not necessarily. I mean, the lateness of the getting into the rainy season, it has to do with an anomaly, which at this point in time, we should have a rainfall in Mexico City. We had some rainfall in May, which was not normal. Usually, May is very hot and very dry. And starting June, this same heat starts to trigger storms. The humidity level has not been so elevated enough to get this triggering by the hot weather of the storms. So we are in a let's say abnormal condition. But is it going to last the full summer? I'm not exactly sure. It's not necessarily. At least this present event is going to last a few more days. It's going to modulate into other things. It's very difficult to say it has finished and something else has started. It may connect with other heat waves that come in the future. But certainly we have to start adapting to that. And I believe that the worst part of adapting is the possibility that the amount of water for human use in the Mexico City area is going to become less available.
It's going to be compromised. That's interesting because it seems that at least last year, there was a lot of rain. I mean, in some parts of the country that have had extreme droughts. When you think about the northern part of Mexico going into California, there was a lot of snow and a lot of rain. Do you have any sense what the rest of the country is going to look like? I mean, that's the seriousness, not only of the heat, is the possibility of not having access to potable water. Do you think do you have any sense what potentially could happen the rest of this year? And then we can talk about the hurricane season.
Yes, well, the presence of the El Nino will probably make the southern part of Mexico much hotter and with less rainfall than normal. Now, I'm not saying that it's not going to rain at all. I don't expect that there is not going to be a rainfall season. There is going to be a rainfall season, but probably with less rainfall than normal in the southern part of Mexico. On the contrary, when we get to the winter months of this year, the rainfall in the northern parts of Mexico, in the northwest part of Mexico, may become higher than normal, precisely because this El Nino condition. So there may be some balancing there of the amount of water. We have to be more careful about, let's say, it's a very common condition in Mexico that if the dams are full, then the agriculture people ask Conagua to
for more water.
Please give me provide me all the extra water that we have available, because we have a lot of water. The problem is that one of the main reason for the dams to exist is to keep water in the good times for the bad times. And it's very difficult to convince agriculture people that if they have water in the dam, they should not use it immediately. They should store it for times that there's going to be deficit of rainfall. The Conagua is usually very good at managing this, but the political pressures are very strong in that sense. So I believe that the correct management of water resources, even resisting the pressures of the population, is going to be essential for getting over this very hot first this summer,
Right.
but maybe a sequence of summers. Let's remember that we had La Niña before starting this year,
Mhm.
3 consecutive years. It's not so common that we have consecutive El Niño years, but it can happen. It has happened. In 1997, 1998, there was an El Niño which lasted for much more than 1 year.
Wow. Well, let me ask you, we have a couple minutes left for this interview. Let me ask you about what does the hurricane season look like? Is it going to be the same? Is it good? We're expecting more hurricanes, less hurricanes? What's your prognosis?
Well, the presence of El Niño will indicate that we should have less hurricanes in the Atlantic Ocean and a little bit more hurricanes in the Pacific Ocean. But that doesn't mean that we would have more hurricanes entering Mexico or less hurricanes entering Mexico. This is just an average of all the North Atlantic and the northeastern Pacific. But it seems that besides El Niño, independently of El Niño, we have very anomalous temperatures of the sea surface in the Atlantic, especially on the coastline of Africa, and also in the, let's say, a belt of a very hot water, which goes from Northern Europe towards the Gulf of Mexico. So let's say the Caribbean is in normal temperature, but there are parts of the Atlantic where there are tropical cyclone genesis, which right now have a much higher temperature. And as you know, tropical cyclones feed themselves energy. They feed themselves from energy from the surface of the sea, and in that sense, the expectation is that we will not have a low hurricane season. Up to this time, the expectation is we will have a normal to slightly above normal Atlantic season. And again, we still have a slightly higher than normal expectation for the Northeastern Pacific.
And no sense as to whether they're going to be the level of these hurricanes, correct? There's just no way to predict where they're going to be more dangerous. There's going to be less dangerous. We just have no sense at this point, right?
Well, we should be very careful about the tropical cyclones, which have already formed when they travel over what we call heat pools all over the sea. They can increase intensity very fast, and they can increase intensity very high. I mean, a tropical cyclone can go from a tropical storm to a hurricane level 5 in 24 hours. So we should be very careful about that. But in general, statistically, we expect them to get to the regular strength. There is a very easy kitchen recipe that about 1/2 of the tropical cyclones will keep the tropical storm maximum level. About half of the hurricanes, which are the other half, will get to below categories 1, 2, and 3. And maybe the last half will be able to get to 4 and 5. So that happens all the time. It's something that works relatively well for active seasons and for non-active seasons. So I believe that what we have to be is very careful because of the temperature of the Atlantic on the moments where the already formed tropical cyclones travel over very hot water. Up to this time, the waters close to Mexico are regularly a little bit higher than normal in the Gulf of Mexico, but nothing abnormal, and also a little bit higher on the Pacific coastline. So we should be careful operationally once the tropical cyclone exists, when it travels over these warm pools or hot pools over the ocean.
Wow. Michael Rosengauss, as usual, it's always great to have you on the show. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us here on Living in Mexico.
It's a pleasure for me. Bye.
Thank you, Michael Rosengauss. He's the former head of Mexico's Meteorological Center services. We're going to go to commercial break. I'm Ana Maria Salazar, and you're listening and watching